oh, now you want to go and meet this strange guy 2 hours away who's a chiropractor. Like, what even is that? Is that a legitimate job? Whatever. Welcome to the What Can We Get Into podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Brown. Today, what my goal is to share a little bit about myself and explain to you why I started this podcast. Now, I've always wanted to do a podcast. I've always been interested in interviewing people, having discussions with people, and just talking and learning more about people from all around the world with different jobs, different cultures, etc. So, a little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Justin Brown. I'm a chiropractor in the great state of Texas, Dallas, Texas, that is, at Texas Spine Center Chiropractic. And I'll get into more about how I started this business about 6 months ago. When I tell you about how I got into chiropractic as a whole, that's a great story to tell, and I think that we'll share that in this episode because that is kind of what made me me. But I'm in Texas and I'm a chiropractor, and this is what I'm doing to, share with the world what I do and bring people on that share the same interests as me and also just the opposite, have completely different views, interests, hobbies. And I originally was going to call this podcast the Waiting Room Podcast. It was going to be in my front waiting room, and we were going to, shoot everything up there, and it was going to be called the Waiting Room. The more I thought about it, the more I thought, I have these different sections of life that I get into, whether it be coffee, whether it be bourbon, whether it be barbecue, cooking, etc. And my wife always jokes with me, what are you going to get into next? How long is this hobby going to last? So when I started this podcast and when I started this journey of thinking the guests I wanted to bring on, etc., I thought, I should bring on people both in the hobbies and topics that I already know about and bring people in from the outside that I really know nothing about. So I thought, well, I'm curious with some of these people what we can get into. So that's how I named it that. A little bit about me. Like I said, I'm a chiropractor. I've been a chiropractor for about 5 years. And the way I got into that is quite an interesting story. So when I was 17 years old, which was about 13 years ago this summer, I was on the beach in Destin, Florida with my then girlfriend, who's now my wife. We were with her family, and we're down there the very first day, and we're on the beach, and this guy approaches me, and he says, hey, because I have a skimboard out there, and I'm riding a skimboard. For those of you who don't know, it's kind of basically how you ride the skim of the wake as it comes in. So I'm using this. I'm with my girlfriend and her family. It's the first trip I had been on. I'm 17 years old. First trip I'd been on with a girlfriend. My parents barely let me go on this trip. I had to beg and plead for them to let me go. So get down there. I'm using the skimboard, and this guy approaches me. He goes, hey, and there's like no one on the beach, by the way. It's very calm, quiet. It's a Sunday. This is before Destin, Florida had this big craze. This guy comes up to me and he goes, hey, is there any way I can borrow your skimboard? I'm thinking, yeah, sure, no problem. You can borrow the skimboard as long as you want. It's not mine. It's actually the rental house's skimboard. But yeah, no problem. He goes, if you let me use this skimboard, I will teach you how to fly this kiteboarding kite that I have. I'm thinking, oh, okay, sure, yeah, sure, sounds fun. So, long story short, he takes the skimboard. He's ripping and rolling on the wake, and then he goes, hey, you gotta check out this kite that I've got. Okay, yeah, you're gonna hold up your end of the deal. Let's go. So he brings me over, and I'm with my father-in-law, or my girlfriend's dad, who's now my father-in-law, and her brother, and we're out there and we're flying this like 6 or 10 foot wakeboarding test kite on the sand. So we're flying this thing, and he's all excited. Oh, you got to fly through these bands and these power bands, and he's all excited. And I'm like, man, this guy's an interesting character here. So I still have pictures of me as a 17-year-old flying this kite, which was hysterical once we fast forward and see how the story played out. But so I fly this kite, and end of the day, we're like, man, that guy was kind of cool. He had a cool kite, etc. The next day we go out there, and he's out there with his family, and they're out there getting seashells and digging for sand castles and all that. And the guy comes back up, and we're tossing football and stuff like that on the beach. Just normal stuff. Like, oh, we found a cool family that we could hang out with all week. Cool, they're staying in the same neighborhood we are. This will be fun. So, one day turns into 2 days, turns into like every day we see the same family. And they basically, at the end of the week, they're like, hey, are you guys interested in going to dinner with us? And, so I want to say it was like 2 days before the trip ended, we go out to dinner with this family that we just had met a few days prior. And we're sitting at the table, and the guy that I'm talking about, he goes, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I thought, great question. So I'm 17. I'm getting ready to go into my senior year of high school. I'd always wanted to be an engineer, whether mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering. I hadn't had it figured out yet, but I knew I wanted to be an engineer. So I set up some of my high school classes when you could pick, here and there with physics and calculus and things like that. And he goes, oh, you want to be an engineer? He's like, have you ever thought about being a chiropractor? And that struck me. I'm like, no, I've never even thought about that. To be honest with you, I didn't really know what a chiropractor did. I knew slightly. This was in the time when YouTube was pretty new, and there were just a couple of chiropractors that were doing this online to sort of promote themselves. And people were like, oh, they were watching it for the ASMR or the entertainment factor of it. But chiropractic was not this widespread thing that it currently is. So I knew about it from that, but I didn't know about it from much other perspective. I didn't go to one growing up. I didn't have much experience other than that. So I go, no, I've never thought about being a chiropractor. Why do you ask? He goes, well, that's what I do. I'm a chiropractor, and I have an office in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, at the time, I was living in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where me and my wife are from. And that's about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from home. And he goes, why don't you come down next Thursday and shadow me? And I thought, oh, interesting. Okay. Oh, sure. I'll give it whatever. What the heck? I'm on summer break. Let's do it. Let's roll. So that's basically where it was. We exchanged numbers, went home. So I get home, and I'm like, hey, mom and dad, who were not on this trip, by the way. I was with my girlfriend's family. Hey, I'm going to go down next Thursday. I'm going to drive. I've had my license about 6, maybe a year. I'm going to drive 2 hours away, and I'm going to go meet this random strange doctor that I met on vacation, and I'm going to shadow him for a day. And of course, they just let me go on this vacation with my girlfriend who I'd been dating like a year. And then they're like, oh, now you want to go and meet this strange guy 2 hours away who's a chiropractor. Like, what even is that? Is that a legitimate job? Whatever. So they end up saying yes. And that next Thursday, so just a couple days after we got home, I find myself driving down to Louisville, Kentucky to shadow this guy. So I show up at 3:00. He was open from 3 to 6 that day, or that was his afternoon shift. I show up from 3 to 6, and I will tell you the feeling I had when I walked in that door is one I'll never forget. And just that afternoon of 3 hours of patient care was one I'll never forget because of how it made me feel. It wasn't anything besides a feeling that I had when I was watching this guy work. Now, this guy's name is Dr. Todd Hosteller. He is a chiropractor in Louisville, Kentucky. Like I said, he owns a business or a practice called The Spine Center Chiropractic. And I bet you in the span of 3 hours, this guy was able to see 30 patients. I was just amazed. My perception of the doctor was one of, you go when you're sick, you go when you're hurt. You don't really like to go because it's a lot of shots, it's a lot of medications, things that I didn't really find too interesting as a 17-year-old kid. So this perspective of people walking in, being happy, having a great interaction with the doctor, fast pace, leaving Most of them were leaving very happy, feeling better, elating that to the doctor, elating that to me. Oh, you're going to be in a great profession. This is the only thing that's helped me, etc. So I spent 3 hours with the guy. I'm like, holy cow. It's like a whirlwind. I was like, how did he just help that many people in just an afternoon shift? So that night he was doing a workshop, which, long story short, is basically like a 30-minute presentation that he does for new patients to educate them on the benefits and the positives to chiropractic care. Things we do, how we help things, and things that we do, maybe the history of what we do besides the adjustment, etc. So I come home from that and I think to myself, could this be a realistic path for me? I don't know. Like, this is just 3 hours I spent with this guy. Keep in mind, I spent 3 hours. It was the first interaction I had with chiropractic. And I was in this guy's office till almost 10 p.m. that night, picking his brain. Because I was like, man, how'd you get here? How many years? How long have you had this practice? How many patients do you see? Just everything. And from day one, I'll never forget, he hands me over like all of his accounting stats and patient visit numbers and income numbers. And it was never from a point of, oh, look how much money I make, he's like, this is the real. This is the real, and this is, the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows, the positives, the negatives to what I do, And that's one thing that I really appreciated, was his ability to be open with me from day one. So I went home and I was like, Mom and Dad, I think I want to consider this. I got time, I got a year to figure this out, but I think I want to consider this. And they said, your dad and I don't really know if that's a good idea. And I'll never forget that, because I was very much like, everything I had done in my life was like, you're doing great with this, you're doing great with that, everything. And they've been supportive. And this was the first time that they were like, we're not really sure if this is a great idea for you. And I'm like, maybe you're right. Maybe I want to prove you wrong. I don't know. So what I did was I called the school about a week before school started, the high school that is, and said, hey, I want to change all those physics and calculus classes to anatomies, physiologies, biologies. That will give me a year to go. I either like this or I don't like this. It will give me more time to shadow maybe this chiropractor, other chiropractors, and figure out if this is really what I want to do. And I did just that. I changed my anatomy, or I changed I changed my calculus to anatomy, physiology, physics, etc. So I get into my anatomy class. I'm like a month in. I'm ecstatic. I'm like, I never really learned anatomy this way, and I just love it. The human body was exciting to me. It just made sense. I could see it. I could visualize it. This muscle moves this joint. This body part does this. It's in this region for this reason. It just all made sense to me. So I continued to shadow Dr. Todd. An afternoon turned into a day, turned into 2 days, turned into a week of basically working with him when he would have staff members out of town, etc. So this drove my passion, and why I'm passionate about students and the younger generation shadowing whatever field you want to get into. It's going to give you more of a perspective on, is this something I want to do? And sometimes it's not. It's not going to be what you intend. And that's a good thing. You just check something off of, I know that I don't want to do this. I think that's just important, maybe if not more important, to figuring out, I think this is what I want to do. So what I did was actually, I reached out to a couple of other chiropractors that were local in Cincinnati, and I said, hey, can I come shadow you? Maybe this is a one-off weird situation, and this guy in Kentucky is just doing fun things, but maybe everybody else is completely different. And that is sort of the case, not a one-off, but there's a wide variety in healthcare and in chiropractic and every profession and how you conduct business and et cetera. So I shadowed this other doctor. Once I had basically kind of committed to this is what I was doing, but I shadowed another doctor, and it was a completely upside down experience, 180 experience from what I had in Kentucky. It was very much a lot colder, less patient interaction with the doctor, less people walking in happy, leaving happy. Just was a much more like cookie cutter sort of, quickly get in and out with the patient. Don't open up too much. Don't get too much out of them. Don't be too much of a human with them, which I found to be not what I want to do. So I found myself kept going back to Dr. Todd's practice because I was so intrigued in this. So decide this is what I want to do. then I started to think about my education options. So ended up going to Miami University, which is not in Miami, Florida, like everyone thinks it is. It's in Oxford, Ohio, the Red Hawks. They have a program there that is kinesiology. Kinesiology is basically the fancy rebranded exercise science. So when I was 10 years ago, when I was entering undergrad, or actually it was probably longer than that, 10 years ago when I was entering undergrad, it was basically, biology, exercise science, or this new kind of cutting edge field for people that wanted to go into chiropractic, PT, occupational therapy, stuff like that, was this new field of kinesiology. So it kind of sets you up for that. So I spent 4 years there, and actually still with the same girlfriend at that point. She went to Miami as well. So spend 4 years there, have the best probably 4 years of my life, loved it, enjoyed it. Then I had to decide on where I was going to go to chiropractic school. So chiropractic school is 4 years post-grad. And what that 4 years breaks down to is about 3 years of classroom work and about a year of hands-on clinicals, however you want to call it, residency, internship type of thing. So I toured 4 schools around the country. I toured a school in Chicago called National, a school in Florida called Palmer, Florida, a school in Atlanta, Life. That's where my mentor went. And then I also shadowed, I keep saying shadowed. I looked at a school in Dallas, Texas called Parker. So as soon as I stepped on the campus of Parker, I kind of had this feeling of like, this feels right. Went through their whole thing, came home, was like, I think this is where I want to go. Now keep in mind, I'm in college at the time, hoping that my girlfriend at the time, who had been with for probably going on 6 years, was going to potentially follow me wherever I go. So decide to end up going to Parker University here in Dallas, Texas. So I start that program in 2017. Me and my girlfriend moved down here. We get engaged. She works. I go to school for 3 years. When we got to Dallas, I wouldn't say that we loved it by any means. It was a big culture shock because we went from smaller cities to this big metroplex of craziness, the traffic, the highways, the things to do. It was honestly overwhelming to someone from a smaller city. And I wouldn't say that I loved it at first. It took us a long time to start to love it. So I went to school here, gained a further knowledge for chiropractic, and I think one thing that was great for me was I could see a lot of people that when they started school, their purpose, their why was maybe not there yet. And, they were like, hey, I think I want to do this. I had this chiropractic experience and, it helped my ankle when I played soccer, or it helped my neck when I had a headache. But that was kind of their why. They hadn't had much experience going into offices and working with patients and stuff that most people, to be honest with you, at that age are not really, or at that stage of their education, are not really getting hands-on experience unless they really seek it out. I went in there knowing exactly what I wanted to do, where I was going after school, what techniques I wanted to do, what patients I wanted to treat. And I went in with an open mind, but I had shadowed around and really honed in and like, this is what I want to do when I graduate. So that was really awesome for me because I learned a lot of new things and new approaches and new techniques and new philosophies, but I always found myself going back to what first got me into this with Dr. Todd. So learned all that. The goal was to basically work with Dr. Todd after I graduated. That was always sort of a thing that I knew I wanted to do, to cut my teeth, to get out, to work with patients in this environment that I knew and loved basically prior. So my last year of school was 2020. Most of you will know that year is not a positive year. I'll never forget when I got into school, like 2020, it's the year that I'm going to graduate. Man, it's going to seems so far in the future. It's going to be such a great year. Well, that year was not so great, as we know, with COVID and all of the fun restrictions and so on that came with that. And now as a chiropractor or a chiropractor in training, the ramifications of COVID made learning the craft rather interesting. People weren't really super excited to be close to people or, be touched by people when we had this virus we knew nothing about and so on. So I entered the clinic January 6th, 2020. First month is orientation. So the first month, how to do the notes, how to see the patients, all the fun syntax of the clinic. February 1st, I want to say, or first week of February, we start seeing patients. You start getting to see people. You studied so long for this. You worked so hard for this. You start getting to see people. Well, a month after I started seeing people, boom, clinic shut down due to COVID, March 16th. So that was a very interesting time because, you're so excited to get out and be like, this is it. This is where I get to learn. And boom, it's pulled right out from underneath you. And me and my classmates were like, holy cow, this is going to be an interesting way to join this profession. Luckily, I had the opportunity, because the clinic at school was closed, to get out to the VA hospital in Dallas, Texas. That was one of the best experiences that I've had as a chiropractor, and really my first experience with patient care out in the field was at the VA hospital. And I have a tremendous amount of respect and gratitude to our troops. I think that what they do, what they sacrifice, and what they give us in this country in terms of freedom is, so important and so revered to me. So getting out and be able to work with veterans at the start was awesome. And it was one of the highest, people really wanted this internship because there was a lot of people that went out and they worked for private practices, and you kind of just got into, here's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I knew that the VA hospital and a hospital-based setting was not going to be where I was for the rest of my life. So I basically spent the last couple of months of my internship working on patients from the VA, and boy, was that an experience. I would say in my 5 years of practice, I've never heard as many wild and crazy stories or mechanisms of injuries as I did in the short time that I spent at the VA. Things that I couldn't even believe that were true that happened overseas and et cetera. It became almost commonplace of, having a 60 to 80 pound ruck and falling off from this height to the ground on your back during an explosion, or, being in a tank as it's blown up, IUDs, etc. I mean, it almost became commonplace, which was wild. But the mechanisms of injuries and the things I saw there were awesome, because from a clinical standpoint, because it really exposed me to a lot of things that you might see once a quarter, once a year, once a month, maybe in private practice, where you're going to see, I saw that almost daily at the VA hospital. So I spent my time at the VA hospital, and then it wrapped up into graduation. So I spent the end of that year wrapping up the VA, like I said, graduated in December of 2020. And then I moved to Kentucky right before Christmas that year, intending to start practice with Dr. Todd in January of 2021. So I did just that. My wife and I, we packed up from Dallas. We moved to Kentucky, and here we go. I went from small city to big city to small city. I'll never forget, we're driving into this city, Louisville, and I think to myself, oh man, this is a small city. A lot different landscape than Dallas, a lot different culture than Dallas. Man, this is, it's going to take a while to kind of go back to downsizing. So my experience at the Spine Center, I started there in January, February 21, was what made me the doctor I am today. It wasn't school, it wasn't the VA, it was my experience at my first job out of school. And I hit the ground running so hard because this practice is so busy and people love this practice. This practice allowed me to really fine-tune my skills on treating acute patients, on treating lower back injuries, on treating acute neck injuries. You don't get a lot of that in school. You don't really have people that have really, really acute back pain and decide to drive into a student clinic to see how that goes. I mean, that's just the reality of the way this works. So my time at the Spine Center was awesome because I got thrown right into learning how to treat acute patients, which as a student, kind of prior to that, I'd been like, I want to treat these people that are wellness and maintenance and, promote this wellness lifestyle. And then you start to think about how boring that actually would be. I the first couple acute patients I had that could barely walk in the office scared the daylights out of me because I didn't know how hard to push, what to do, what not to do. It's the hardest thing about being a chiropractor is knowing what to do, when to do it, and basically how hard and how frequently you're going to do that, right? And that's the experience piece of what comes. Everybody talks about experience is how you're going to gain this. There's no book, there's no textbook that tells you, a patient is a 10 out of 10, only push this hard on them, only do this today. I mean, there's a general guideline on, you want to start conservative and then go a little bit more aggressive with time. But the acute patients is really where I spend a lot of my time treating them nowadays. So that's what I tracked in my practice. That's what my practice is based around, is treating acute back injuries, disc injuries, herniated discs, radiating pain, etc. It's really what my office is set up for. It's what the spine center in Louisville was set up for. So I spent 4 amazing years working alongside my mentor there. And part of me, as I was there the whole time, part of me thought, I have this burning desire to be a business owner. However, if that doesn't happen, will I be happy forever at this practice? And I thought the answer was maybe. I wasn't sure. I was working a dream job, but had this entrepreneurial burning sensation in me that was just so fiery. I couldn't suppress it. First 6 months of practice, I'm like, this is great. I'm never leaving. And then it started where I was like, I think I could do this on my own. And some of that is blindful bliss, probably a little bit. You don't have any clue what's going on behind the scenes where you're like, yeah, I could run this place. I can do what he does. And I think my amount of time that I spent there was perfect. I was able to learn enough with patient care, perfect my skills and my technique, learn some of the business side of it, learn some of the employee management side of it, learn a lot of the other things that they don't teach you in school, whether about patient care or more importantly about owning and running a business. So I spent 4 years there, and like I said before, I had this burning desire in me to not only own a business, start a business, but me and my wife really missed the great state of Dallas, Texas. Or I guess that would be city and state of Dallas, Texas. We just loved Dallas. We missed it. We talked about it constantly. I don't know why. I can't explain it to you. I can't. It just feels, if you've got an intuition, if you've got a gut, it's a gut feeling for me and it's a gut feeling from my wife. So in June of 2024, my wife and I moved down to Dallas and we started this practice called Texas Spine Center Chiropractic. It's a little ode or a little kudos to my mentor, his practice, and how much that shaped me and how much that shaped what this place does and what it stands for. And it's really me trying to emulate, because I once heard a quote that was, nobody really, and I think it's Ryan Serhant, who's a big realtor. He's got Netflix shows and he's a big realtor up in New York City. He said, no one really knows what they're doing. Some people are just a little bit more risky or a little bit more ballsy to try to figure out if something works. And if it doesn't, they're going to try to go a different way to try to figure out if that works, right? So it struck me because as a non-business owner, I always thought, this guy's got it figured out. He knew exactly how he was going to get there and he got there. And for most people, that's probably not true. They're not afraid to fail. They tried so many times and they didn't know what they were doing, and they didn't know how they were going to get there. They just had this beacon of light of where they knew they were heading, and it may result in failure a few times, but they just kept going. They didn't care what failure meant. They didn't care that other people may be watching. They just knew they wanted to get there, and they didn't really care besides getting there. And that's really how I try to live my life. 6 months into business is not necessarily worrying about the small failures and the days where I'm unproductive, is really focusing on that that end goal. So I'm going to round this back in. I'm going to weave this back into, we started this practice 6 months ago, and basically what I'm doing here is a emulation, is my version, my Texas version of where I was the past 4 years. So I treat a lot of disc injuries here. I treat a lot of people with disc pain, disc injuries, herniated discs, pinched nerves, etc. And I intend to use this podcast and this platform to go a little bit more into detail on how I do these things, on how I treat these things. For instance, the use of decompression therapy in a disc injury and how that helps, and why I think it's the best non-surgical option for alleviating any sort of disc issue or compressive disc on a nerve causing radiating pain issue, which is primarily a lot of the people that I treat. Now that's one thing, probably the biggest thing that I treat here in this office. Number two being postural correction. And postural correction is interesting because, when people come to a chiropractor, they kind of expect you to do everything, or maybe not everybody, but most people are like, I'm here, I have pain, fix me. And the control that we have as chiropractors is pretty high, to be honest with you. As long as you show up and you're willing to do kind of treatment plan that I prescribe for you, the success rate is pretty good. Now, there's other things, like I have a master's in nutrition. I've always joked that I don't do nutrition in my practice because the patient compliance is totally out of your hands. I could tell you this is what you should and shouldn't eat. We could run all these values and come up with a game plan. Now, whether you do that or not, it's completely up to you. So I always like chiropractic because as the doctor, I have a lot of control over, if something's not working, let's change it up. If something's working, let's keep it going. And I have a lot of control over whether a patient is improving or not. And if they're not getting better, then I've got to get more imaging, whether it be MRIs, or I got to dig deeper and be more of a sleuth to get to the bottom of this. And that's what I really love about treating patients. So been here 6 months, do a lot of decompression and working with disc injuries. Now, the other portion of that was posture. And the reason I got off on that tangent is because the cool thing about posture is it's fixable. The bad thing about posture is a lot of people, because of lifestyle, have to work at it. And it's not necessarily something you have to think about working on. You should think about changing your office setup. You should think about the way you sleep. You should think about how much time you spend on your phone looking down. You should think about those things. However, the actual physiological posture and how the body holds posture should be a autonomic response, meaning it should be something that your body just holds, kind of like your diaphragm when you breathe. It breathes, it works for you, and then when you stop thinking about it, it goes right back to how it was. I can control it, I can let it go, and the body takes over. That's how posture should be. And what happens is with time, where you're spending a lot of time looking forward and looking down, those postural muscles get turned off. So my goal in the way that I sort of structure this is I actually try to retrain those muscles with resistance exercise. And it's one of the best protocols. I do before and after x-rays. And I've had very little in my 5 years of taking thousands of pre and post x-rays not improve. So that's another thing that I'm really passionate about is improving posture. I think they say that sitting is like the new smoking, and I think that sitting is causing postural deficits, whether in the neck or whether in the lower back. And quite literally, I'm a little nervous where our future generation, my generation and even a little younger, that grew up, I kind of grew up a little bit after like the iPad, iPod era, iPhone era. It was introduced at that time, but it was consumed nowhere near what it is now. I'm a little concerned with people 10 years younger than me, 20 years younger than me, where their spines, where their bodies are going to be in their 30s, 40s, 50s. I think that as chiropractors, we're going to be very busy, and I say that in a very serious light, not a joking light. And I think the surgeons are going to be even busier, because what I'm seeing on patients earlier and earlier and earlier is not setting them up for success. When I treat somebody that's 70 years old that has neck pain, that's hard to treat because of their age. They weren't using an iPhone or an iPad or on a computer when they were 15 to 20s to 30s. I'm a little scared with how it's going to be treating a 60 to 70-year-old with neck or back pain in 30 to 40 years from now with how long they've been in that position or how long those changes have been brewing. Makes me a little nervous, and that's why I'm passionate about changing this, is helping the next generation alleviate some of these changes. And it's totally possible. It takes work on the patient's effort. I can get you started. I can show you how it's going to work. I can show you how it's done. I can show you maybe a quick pre and post x-ray of here's how this is going to look when you're done. But, the work really lies with the patient on that. So that one's awesome, but a little bit more challenging because the patient compliance piece. So that's where I am now. I'm in Dallas, Texas. So I have, I got my wife. She's a stay-at-home mother, and my remote office manager. She calls herself the CEO of basically our family, the chief everything officer. So she helps me out outside of here. She raises our son, Oliver. He's going on 2. And then I have 2 golden retrievers, Harper and Ellie. If you've never had a golden retriever, if you get one, they're addictive. You're probably going to get 2. I would get a 3rd, but my wife said no. So I got 2 golden retrievers, a baby and a wife. And I'm excited for this podcast because this is something, like I started off, this is something I've been wanting to do for a very, very long time. It's something that I love to, I look at my job basically as speed dating. And people laugh when I say that because my appointment times are 10 minutes. I always joke, if it's a good conversation and things are going well, it might turn into a 12-minute appointment. Things are a little weird, patient's not too talkative, they're having a day where they don't want to talk, or, energy's off. It might be like a 7 or 8 minute appointment. I joke about that because I have this all day long where I have to try to interconnect with people all day long. And one thing that I was advised as a student, a very young student, by a very wise professor that I had here at Parker was, you have to be very, very good at modulating your emotions and how you talk to people. And that's one thing that I think this job has really taught me to do and really got me interested in, is the psychology of how you deal with patients. It's not necessarily psychology as in a mind game. It's psychology of, if somebody's down here, how can you bring them up here? If somebody's way up here and they're stressed out, how can we bring them down here? Now, there's a lot of cool physiological benefits of what I do as a chiropractor that help people come to equilibrium or homeostasis. That's cool without me saying a word. But there's also things that I can do to try to maybe be more of a therapist to them. They got 10 minutes with me. They're stressed out about work. How can I bring them down? They're in the dumps. They had a bad day, their dog's sick. Let's bring them up. That's one thing that I really like and has kind of led me to this. Another thing is, this wise professor told me, you have to be very good at working and communicating with patients. The reason is, you may have a patient that walks in as sad as can be. They just lost, their dog, their husband, their wife, and you kind of got to come down to their level, right? And you got to console them. You have to be empathetic. And then 10 minutes later, you could have somebody that came in that just got engaged the day prior, and you got to bring it up. You got to be excited. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I can't believe it. So through that, I've really learned to love working with people, and I've learned to get people's perspectives. I mean, what can I educate this patient on to help them? But also, what can I gather from them that might also help me help them? What do they like to do? What kind of things can I learn from them? Do they have a cool hobby or a cool job that, I have nothing about? So that led me to doing this podcast, because I'm going to bring on people that, are in similar field time I'm in, but also people that are in fields that I know nothing about. And I really want to pick their brain and learn from them. So look forward in the future to more episodes, less one-on-one dialogue like this, unless this is something that people like, but more dialogue with guests. So I've got a couple episodes already recorded. They'll be being released here soon. I look forward to sharing all this content with you guys. I'm Dr. Justin Brown at Texas Spine Center Chiropractic in Dallas, Texas. And this is What Can We Get Into?